Hey, and we're live. We are live. Hey, how you doing? You're listening to Restore the Republic, the voice of the people who's had enough of the corrupt judges, enough of the rogue cops, enough of the lawyers who twist the law, and the politicians who trample it. This is a show that dares ask, where did our American de jure government go to, and how do we get it back? I'm your host, Sheriff Andrew Ike, on the unincorporated Richland County, Ohio, and every week we expose the lies and decode the legal traps and empower you to reclaim what's rightfully yours. No fluff, no compromise, just facts. With me, as always, Sheriff Adam Bonner on the unincorporated Summit County, Ohio. How's it going, Adam?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
Doing good. You know what? We got a good one today. I think it all stems with people I think people are really starting to wake up, really starting to see all the fraud and all the corruption. And, there's a lot of people doing a lot of research on social medias. And I just think people are starting to get it.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of buzz out there. There's still a lot of people who aren't really aware because, like their leadership might not be communicating with them across the states, but there's definitely some buzz out there. So, what would you want to say to rookie cops that are just now coming onto departments? If you see us out and about, we're just American people. Obviously not in your jurisdiction. We've probably talked to your chiefs or put them on notice. So you might want to check before you go. Yeah, you probably want to check with your chiefs before you go poking around.
Yeah.
Other than that, most Americans believe that they live under a constitutional republic. They think that their government is a public institution accountable for the people, bound by constitutions and operating in their best interests. But, what is the belief is based on a carefully maintained illusion. People don't really comprehend. So here's the shocker. The government you interact with every day, your local courthouse, your DMV, your IRS office, it's not a constitutional government. Those are corporations.
Yeah.
Of corporations, of corporations, of corporations. They're all franchisees of corporations. And they're trying to unlawfully convert you into a version of a corporate entity instead of a living man or woman. So, you guys heard that right. These are registered as corporate bodies operating under commercial law. They have articles of incorporation, they have CEOs, revenue streams, and profit motives. They are not sovereign institutions. They are service providers, contract service providers who are there to offer you benefits. And you have the right to say whether you want to accept those benefits or tell them to get.
Well, hey, Adam, real quick, I think the people around this country are seeing right now, what that's all about. They have, you're receiving benefits.
Right.
At any time, they can shut them benefits off. And,
right.
Look at the governmental shutdown. They got people, so reliable on these damn benefits that once they shut them down, everybody's in a tush. What the hell do we do now? Yeah. So.
Right. So I guess where I was going is, for instance, a good example of them just being corporations and they are for profit. You might have a courthouse that's named one thing. You grew up knowing it is that name on a county, it had a county seal. And then, people like us come along and expose all of these types of things that they're doing and that they've been dissolved and still operating as, business as usual. And then so they change the name. Now it's called something different. And it has new principles,
Adam,
new people who run it.
Adam.
Yeah.
We're not live again. Hang on. We got to restart, okay? I just noticed that. All right. We're going to restart, okay?
Go ahead.
Hey, we're live. Glad little technical difficulties, but we're back. You're listening to Restore the Republic, the voice of the people who's had enough of the corrupt judges, enough of the rogue cops, Enough of the lawyers who twist the law and the politicians who trample them. This is a show that dares to ask what happened to the de jure American government and how can we get it back? I'm your host, Sheriff Andrew Wank on the unincorporated Richland County, Ohio. And every week we expose the lies and decode the legal traps and empower you to reclaim what's rightfully yours. No fluff, no compromise, just fact. And with me as always, Sheriff Adam Bonner on the unincorporated Summit County, Ohio. How you doing, Adam?
Good. I guess we're getting reset. It didn't look like it went or it shut off on my end, but I could see on your end that it wasn't live. So, all right. Yeah, I'm doing good. I guess I'll take it from the top again.
Well, just say, we were talking about real quick. The hell were we talking about?
Talking about corporations and
yeah. Well, we have a good one today, anyways. Let me give the title. It's the end of the corporate empire. What comes next for free Americans? Let's begin with the truth, and that it's hard to swallow, but impossible to ignore once you see it. Most Americans believe they live under a constitutional republic. They think their government is a public institution, accountable to the people, bounded by the Constitution, operating in their best interest. But what is the belief is based on its carefully maintained illusion. Here's the shocker. The government you interact with every day, your local courthouse, your DMV, your IRS office, it's all constitutional government. It's not a constitutional government. It's a corporation. Basically that's what it is.
Great. Yeah, so you guess, you guys heard that right. These entities are registered as corporate bodies. They're operating under commercial law. They have articles of incorporation, CEOs, revenue streams, and profit motives. They are not sovereign institutions. They're just not. They are contract service providers. This transformation began over 160 years ago when the original American government was quietly sidelined and replaced by corporate structures, statutory law, legal fiction laws, the rest of the stuff we talk about. So these corporations assume the names of lawful institutions like the United States. But they're not the same. If you actually look at the United States, for the United States, of the United States, little telltale signs like that. They all operate under a different set of rules. Maritime law, for instance, commercial codes, ordinances, and private contracts that you'll never see, which is why a lot of times when you go into these municipalities that have all been dissolved, and they've been bankrupt numerous times, basically what will happen is you bring up the Constitution or civil rights or anything like that, and they just tell you that doesn't exist in that jurisdiction. They don't care, and they'll tell you flat out that they don't care. Exactly. So people need to pay attention to that type of stuff. So that's where it gets personal.
Yeah. Yeah. When you were born, your name was converted into a legal fiction, a corporate entity. Your birth certificate became a bond. Your social security number became a tracking ID. You entered into a system that treats you not as a living man or woman, but a franchise of a corporate state. We all know this. Everybody's starting to pick up on this. This is why you're taxed without consent, why you're fined for victimless infractions, why you're subject to endless regulations, licenses, and fees. You're not being governed, you're being managed. And the managers, they're not public servants. They're corporate officers enforcing policy, not law.
Right. Most of them are doing all of these things as a colorable offense under color of law, and they're breaking the law to enforce the legal because most of them are under blanket policies. They're not bonded properly. They're not ferreted properly. The proper documentation is not registered to the state, to the Secretary of State's office or other places that might need to hold that type of documentation. And this is stuff that these guys don't comprehend. I mean, obviously we're not supposed to know it, but you can't unlearn something like that as so criminal in nature and then not share it with people that this is what's going on.
Yeah, we just need to get this, out to some of these law enforcement officers, FBI agents, military, National Guardsmen, that they're so indoctrinated, they can't think. They cannot
Well,
think.
a lot of it has to do with the Libra code training that they get. I mean, it's all based off of revised code for whichever state they live in. It's all based off statutory law or, bits and pieces of civil. And, we're not pushing any type of hate rhetoric or anything like that against them. We're just making people aware of, what their actual rights are in these scenarios, and trying to inform these policy enforcement agencies, because at the end of the day, they're just corporate security. And, the whole country's under a ruse.
Well, you know what? Hey, they are committing crimes. Bottom
Yep.
line, they are committing crimes. We've mentioned this many times before. And that's why I've been trying to talk to FBI and military members and trying to tell them this. This has got to stop. We're here to get along. We're here to provide amnesty. We're here to do the best we can, together. Because we're in two different jurisdictions, that doesn't mean a whole lot other than our jurisdiction is superior to theirs. But we have to draw a line sooner or later. This stuff's got to stop. You're committing crimes against the people, and it has to stop sooner or later.
Well, this all goes back to training and mindset. And when you look at the psychology behind why a lot of people join the military or policy enforcement, you get your three categories. You get the ones who are doing it because it's a family tradition. Their dad did it, their grandpa did it, et cetera, et cetera. You get the other types who sometimes they don't have an opportunity, so they join the military, or maybe they come from an area that still enforces that either you join the military or you're going in the clink for 10 years. I know that some cities still do that across the country, but not everywhere's like that anymore. They don't give you a second chance. Some states have programs where they'll tell you to go to college and get a degree, stop committing crimes, or they're going to throw you in jail. So they'll make you go to college. Well, that doesn't really work when you're having working class people or people right out of high school sitting next to somebody who likes to rob and assault people. It's just probably not a good idea to do that. I mean, there's online courses you can take where you don't have to be around people who are trying to better themselves. But apparently these systems, they didn't think of that. It's kind of common sense.
Yeah.
But where did we even leave off? We were talking about how you interact with the government every day. So
yeah, I was saying, they're not public servants. They're corporate officers enforcing policy, not law,
Right. Well, I guess, these are registered as corporate bodies operating under commercial law. They have articles of incorporation, CEOs, revenue streams, and profit motives. They're not sovereign institutions. They're service contract providers. So this transformation began over 160 years ago, when the original American government was quietly sidelined and replaced by a corporate structure. These corporations assume the names of lawful institutions like the United States, but they are not the same. They operate under a different set of rules: maritime law, commercial, statutory codes, revised codes, private contracts. So, all these types of things, it's not a legal theory, it's not a law theory. This is the framework behind everything you experience as a U.S. citizen. U.S. citizens are not Americans. You have not been declared as an American yet. That's why we come on here and do this every week. We're on here telling people about how to declare themselves, and that's the main intent, and to educate our employees. So basically, we're trying to explain why so many Americans feel powerless, unheard, and overregulated. They're living in a system designed for commerce, not for freedom. They're living in a system that only can communicate with fictitious or dead entities. So that's where the main point of that is that if you're a living man or a woman and you have progeny that is living, those are not things that were meant to be turned into a thing or a corporate entity. That's all private banking, what they're doing when they convert you into those things for profit. And you're never going to see the private side of the ledgering that they're profiting from the things that they're commercializing, such as your uppercase and lowercase name. It's all been capitalized. If you've noticed, when you look at your bills when they come through the mailbox of your beneficiary, it's all caps in one version or the other. If it's uppercase and lowercase, that's because you haven't contracted with them yet, and they're trying to offer you a contract. As soon as you get that first statement in the mail and your beneficiary opens that letter, as soon as you contract, they're going to start sending things in the uppercase, one of the versions of the uppercase name.
Yeah. So, hey, but here's the twist. The corporate empire is collapsing. The financial structures behind it are bankrupt. The legal foundations are crumbling. In all that collapse lies an opportunity for Americans to reclaim their lawful status, their land, and their voice. Let's go over the struggles of state nationals. Now that we've peeled back the illusion of the corporate governance, let's talk about what happens when someone decides to step out of it, decides to step out of it.
Well, so when you're correcting your status, declaring yourself as a state citizen or national of a state, some would say state national. There's a lot of confusion about the proper terminology, and maybe it's not listed by the statutory civil government in their definitions as to what a national of a state is or a state national. That's why I say state citizen national, because you can correct yourself to be a national of a state, but when you fill out more paperwork and you get that recorded through the land recording office, you become state citizen eligible to hold positions and offices now, such as ourselves, right? And then we hold lawful electoral things where our Americans come forth and decide who they want to be their peacekeeper on their counties and their national soil jurisdictions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's pretty easy. I always explain to people, we changed our status to American state national. But once you run for office and are elected, then you become a state citizen, because the citizen owes an obligation to the government. Just like the U.S. citizen owes an obligation and is part of that U.S. government, that foreign subcontractor of ours.
Right. So when you correct your status, it's not just a paperwork exercise. It's a declaration of independence. It's saying basically, I'm not a corporate franchise. I'm a living man or woman. I'm standing on the land and soil. And, I'm not governed outside of natural law and the original American system. And this is exactly what the problem is with this unlawful conversion that we keep talking about. Unlawful conversion takes you from being a man or a woman, and it converts you into being different types of persons or things for their profitable gain. It has nothing to do with us being able to have our birthright inheritance. This all has to do with trust that the state created through those birth certificates, through those Social Security registrations, and so on. So basically, you go to court, one of those things is getting tapped into, double and triple dipping. So on the public side of the ledgering, you're going to pay fines and fees and all that type of stuff, court costs, attorney fees, things of that nature. But on the private side of the ledgering, penal codes have a dollar amount attached to them that they're tapping from one of the trusts or one of the bonds, the birth certificate bond. And on top of this, everything's becoming a surety that gets compounding interest daily, and you're the principal to the interest of that. There's a process to fill out to get your interest, but I noticed that since a lot of these places are changing their names, and maybe they're not under the county seal now, or the county, whatever your county municipal, now they're being called a city municipal. Doesn't really matter. And also, by changing the name, that basically voids every case that was under the previous court's name. So that's something that people should be looking at too. Um, you know, so here's the reality. Once you make that declaration, you enter a legal or social minefield when your status corrected. Most public officials, judges, clerks, police officers, they have no idea what a state national is, what a state citizen is. They've been trained to operate within the corporate system. To them, everything is about code, statutes, ordinance, policy. Again, the big word policies, because they're policy enforcement agencies. So when you show up asserting your rights under land law, which is what we do, basically they often respond with confusion, skepticism, or just flat out hostility. You're some type of sovereign citizen, you're some type of combative belligerent, when actually they're being all of those things because they're under you. They work for you.
Yeah. Imagine walking into your county recorder's office to file your land patent, and you've done your research, you followed the lawful process, but the clerk says, "Hey, we don't do that here." Not because it's illegal, but because they've never seen it before. You're not breaking the law, you're breaking their expectations,
Right. They've kind of prohibited stuff like that, I think, on like 48 states. And the other 2 states that actually allow it only allow it to governmental agencies. Well, how can a governmental agency that only exists statutorily, in that different jurisdiction that's already based off fraud and deception, and, it primarily exists on paper, how can that own any real assets or property?
Can't. But this is a daily reality for state nationals. They're not just reclaiming their rights, they're re-educating the system, trying to. Every interaction becomes a teaching moment. Most of us know it, going out there talking to people. Every document becomes a challenge. Every assertion of sovereignty becomes a test. And it's not just the officials, friends, family, and your neighbors that may question your choices. They may say, you're not patriotic, or you're trying to cheat the system. But the truth is, you're trying to restore the system to its original lawful form. We've all been doing that, and we all have the story of some of your family members getting pissed off at you and thinking you're crazy. But this is the original form. We're just restoring it, just like we've been mentioning.
Right. Well, the path requires courage. It requires clarity. It requires community. It's a community effort. People have to be willing, open-minded, and coachable. The problem I'm seeing with the way the education system's been the past 30 years or so, we're running into a lot of deep state opposition, because the way that the liberal education system is, there's an agenda behind the way that they're dumbing the population down. Our kids, if they're not being educated at home to think for themselves, to have common sense, critical thinking skills, knowing about their rights, they're basically just being trained to be puppets for test-taking purposes to get scores that then give schools, state kickbacks and incentives. That's what it's all about. It's not about educating your progeny to be anything productive in society.
Exactly.
So, basically, I was getting to, we need to support each other, to stand together, and to rebuild lawful governance from the ground up, because the struggle isn't just legal. It's cultural, it's psychological, it's spiritual, and every day more and more Americans are waking up and choosing to walk this path. And we welcome you. But if you come over here, slandering and defaming and, doing all of those types of silly things, we're going to tell you you're probably not ready. And we don't need people like you. We already have enough attention as it is. It's probably not going to be a good fit, because you can't comprehend that you're already breaking laws by the way that you speak and the way that you act.
Just got to take a deep breath and relax. Peaceful. Be peaceful. Well, this is the rise of the lawful assemblies. So far, we've exposed the corporate illusion and explored the personal struggles of those who've chosen to step outside. Now let's talk about what's rising in its place. Across the country, something extraordinary is happening. Americans, ordinary men and women, are coming together to rebuild what was lost. The lawful self-governance, and we talked about that all. That's how this country was made. Self-governing, what you do, what your work, your labor, you get out of it what you put into it. Basically.
Right. Well, it's all been securitized and collateralized. Your labor has been basically collateralized for the world deficit, unbeknownst to you. Never-ending debts that give interest to the bankers, basically, and it never goes away. And people need to start researching what's going on with the world deficit, how your country's deficit is, and start looking into that type of stuff. I guarantee you all things are going to go back to some form of banking or another. It's really not rocket science.
Yeah.
Of course, the statutory system and the foes that be, they like to make it, very complicated to sweep all their crimes under the rug. And I've about had it with those type of conversations. I don't know about you.
Yeah.
I'm just like, no, I see it pretty clearly. I'm pretty sure that what you're doing is a crime, but I digress. So, these aren't protests that, Sheriff Andrew was talking about. These aren't political movements. These aren't, anything unlawful or nefarious. These are lawful assemblies, organized bodies of living people reclaiming their birthright to govern themselves, to not be legal fictions, and to do it under the original American system, which is, by way of a constitutional republic. No. So here's the key difference. The corporate government operates under commercial codes and maritime law. So lawful assemblies operate under land law, the law of the people, the law of peace, the law of the land. The assemblies are forming in every state. We talk about this all the time. We're not waiting for permission. We're not asking for recognition. We don't need it. Historically, there's plenty of things out there that will justify what we're talking about. And it doesn't matter what century we're in. It doesn't matter. It's still on the books. So, we're basically standing on authority that was never truly lost, only obscured.
Exactly.
Hidden for a reason.
Yeah, and we're doing work. Out here we're trying to get to the land patents, recording land claims and patents. Not just deeds. Electing peace officers, not police, like the sheriffs here. We have 5 total sheriffs here in Ohio. We want to sooner or later get them on, but we'll work on that later. But we also are holding public offices accountable. Not through protest, but through lawful notice and demand. I've mentioned this before. Adam's done it himself. I've done it myself. We went to city council meetings. We've talked to these people. We put in lawful notices about being here on the land, being status corrected, being sheriffs, and what we expect out of them. And educating our communities about the difference between corporate policy and lawful governance. In some states, the assemblies are helping local sheriffs that are already there to understand their role, not as an enforcer of corporate codes, but as a protector of the people's rights. Those sheriffs hopefully will work with the assembly to ensure peaceful resolution of disputes rather than punitive enforcement. That's another subject because we've talked about that before. These constitutional sheriffs are called, and I kind of have a problem with that, even though they're trying to do a right thing. If you're a U.S. citizen, you're not doing a constitutional, you're pulling people over and stopping people for codes and statutes. And that's a crime against the people, like I said before. So.
Yeah, typically under revised code, like Ohio revised code, you'll see ORC, on an infraction. But I don't really like to study a lot of that stuff. I mean, I have, just for, whatever it was that I was working on at the time. And, there's over 88 million of those statutes, codes, ordinances across the country. It's an awful lot. That would take, 100 people 10 years straight of just researching through all of those. And I had somebody the other day say something ignorant, and I could tell that they weren't very knowledgeable. And I think I know who they are too and where they live. But they said that there was 330,000 laws, and they didn't specify which jurisdiction or civil or criminal. I mean, I was like, this is the equivalent of people throwing shit at the wall and hoping it sticks, trying to make a point, and they don't even know what they're talking about. And then on top of that, there was like defamation and slanderous, type wording in the comment. So I didn't even have to do anything. I guess somebody reported it and it was taken down. But, people need to realize that, I can look at you. It's not that hard. You can be tracked. Think before you speak, when you're coming on here. If you're living in your mom's basement and you're not working and you're mad at the world, you should probably get up and go better yourself, go to school, get a job, stop, trolling on the internet. It's kind of pathetic. Other than that, we were talking about holding public officials accountable, through going and doing these notices at city council meetings. I'm going to have to probably get after my local city in the spring, but I have gone around to a couple other ones in the area. Some of them, they try to make it difficult. I think we had an issue here during COVID, folks, where they had 10 or 15 of the officers from the city making it difficult for people to go speak their piece. And, there's a lot of people there that work in the legal system. And they were getting ushered out of there because they were asking, why are you enforcing all of these unlawful mandates? And there's no scientific evidence to back up any of this type of stuff. And our kids are being, subject to it. And the schools having to wear masks all day, depriving them of oxygen, which probably could lead to brain damage. So there's a lot of that type of stuff.
I was going to say, with all that set aside, there's nowhere in the contract that we gave our governmental service providers does it say any kind of emergency situation. So all that is just debunked right from the start. That whole COVID shutdown was just one big ball of shit. I mean, that they really frauded the people of this country. Well, people around the world,
One of the followers said COVID was an IQ test. I agree.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree myself.
Oh man. Well, we needed some comedy anyway. Where was we? Basically holding these public officials accountable. Most of them aren't even technically a real public official. Like I said, they don't have the proper bonding, the proper paperwork filled out and on record. And this isn't me just saying that. I've done a lot of research. I've had whole counties deny me of getting those records, and then they tried to put stipulations on it outside of open records requests. And that's how you know that they're trying to cover something up that's going on. You do a public records request or a FOIA, and then they want to send you, some other document to try and invite you to a hearing or something for things that aren't pertaining to you, but to some other thing that they're trying to communicate to. That's a crime. Yeah. You can't deny somebody a records request and send them a subpoena or something stupid like that, or you need to appear to a hearing, or you can't sign for these. We can't give you these without signing for that. That's the type of crap that goes on across the country. Yeah. And I'm aware of it. It happens every day. I just happened to talk with some service providers that say that they're being forced into doing people like that because, they're not going to be able to keep their job if they're not willing to do that. So, If I haven't spoke with your department in my county, it's probably because things like that are going on and I'm looking at it and I know it exists and you guys are probably guilty of it. So at some point, we'll probably be having a discussion about that. But, educating your communities about the differences between corporate policy and lawful governance, that starts at the family level. You know, I don't talk to half of my family, but the half that I do talk to, they're all aware of this. And, for the most part, they get it. Of course, it took a couple years to kind of break the ice, but, I think a lot of people have fear in them, because the way that the world is today and the things that they see happening. And they don't want to be involved in things that they think are going to cause them to get jammed up or be hassled. And I get that, but that's not going to fix anything.
Yeah.
You got to get in there and get your hands dirty and start educating yourself, start reading. So, in some states, these assemblies are helping local sheriffs, which would be administrative, or commercial sheriffs they're kind of sitting in vacated offices. They're not like lawfully there. They're sitting in vacated offices. When we come on scene and we show them our declarations, affirmations that we're here, this is what they need to comprehend, is that position is now filled, but you are not kicking them out of that office, even though technically, I suppose you could if you really wanted to. That's not the initiative here. The initiative here is we are concurrently here. There are two jurisdictions, and we run in the one that is superior, running concurrently next to your statutory legal fiction realm. Does that make sense?
Yeah. See jurisdiction.
Right.
We are the land and soil.
So, basically we're just trying to help them comprehend, the true role that they have and the roles that we have. Ours are not as enforcers of corporate codes, but as a protector of the people's rights. We stand with the people that put us in our lawfully elected position. It wasn't because of how many donors gave us campaign money, how many people fixed the campaign, and it has nothing to do with any of that. We're here because we were elected lawfully, and we put our notices in the paper about our elections coming up and then what the election results were, and that is all done by the book. So other than that, we're basically just letting these corporate sheriffs know that we're standing with our people, and that those sheriffs hopefully will work with us and work with the assemblies to ensure peaceful resolution of disputes rather than punitive enforcements. This is what restoration looks like, basically. It's quiet, it's lawful, it's powerful, and it's growing. These assemblies are not fringe, they're not, foundational. They are the roots,
Exactly.
They're the roots that, started the whole thing for a foundation to sit on. And then from there it grew. So basically, these assemblies and their roots work represent the original intent of the American governance. So that power resides with the people, not these corporations. I mean, they'll argue with you till they're blue in the face, telling you that, they get unlimited attempts to, joinder you in their jurisdiction. And that's just simply not true.
Yeah.
And anyhow, these assemblies, they're there, to help educate and to help you, learn about who you are, who you've always been, who you're supposed to be. And, if you've ever felt like your voice doesn't matter, or like the system is rigged, if you've ever wondered what real freedom looks like, look to the assemblies. We're not just here talking about change. We're actually building it from the ground up again, trying to salvage what bits and pieces of law and history we can, because every day, this stuff's getting crushed and stepped on and suppressed.
Yeah, without a doubt. Well, what comes next for the free Americans? We've exposed the illusion. We've explored the struggle. We've witnessed the rise of the lawful assemblies. Now comes the most important question of all. What's next? What does life look like beyond the corporate empire? What does it mean to live as a free American, not just in theory, but in practice? So let's break it down. Here, let's talk about education and the awakening.
Okay, so, if we look at it, the first wave is already here. We're living proof that the first wave is here. More Americans are waking up every day. They're asking questions. We get a lot. They're reading documents. They're studying law versus legal. They're realizing that the system they trusted is not what it seemed, how they were taught or brought up around. This awakening isn't just intellectual, it's emotional and spiritual. It's the movement when someone says, I'm done being managed. I'm kind of sick and tired of being sick and tired. And, what do you do? What do you do after that? So, well, I'm ready to be self-governing. I'm ready to take care of my own affairs. I'm of lawful age and, of majority. And, I'm not chattel. I'm not a slave. I'm not your legal fiction. I'm none of those things. I've never been. And, at that point, you need to just decide, if you're going to take the power back or if you're just going to be walked around on a leash.
Yeah, well, there are assumptions and presumptions they have in that sea jurisdiction. That shit's going to stop, because we're not taking that shit no more. You're not presuming anything about us Americans any longer.
Right.
Back.
Yeah, I personally, I don't care about all that because I've already rebutted all that and they acquiesced and they don't get unlimited attempts to harass me or try to joinder me. And if they do keep pushing, it's not going to be pretty. The law is pretty harsh and there are still things on the books. I'm not going to name them. It's in the 3000s though, and I think you know where that's going. And we do have authority to do that. The people have always had the authority to do it, regardless of what the FBI says or what any of these commercial agencies say. They just don't want you to think that you have any rights or that you have power, but you do. We hear the people every day complaining about what goes on in their lives, their cases, how they're being treated. Like I said, I'd be pissed off if I was a U.S. citizen.
Oh my God, how they're being railroaded. That's the word of the day, railroading.
Steamrolled is a good word, and it's not the same type I used to sing cadence to while I was jogging, at like 4 a.m.
Yeah.
Anyhow, the corporate system doesn't go quietly. It pushes back. Anytime you try to challenge anything, jurisdiction, it denies filings, it ignores notices. We've been seeing this across the state. And these are to the people at the, like AGs, secretaries of states, pretty much anybody who's anybody, and we know that they're in vacated positions and that they don't have the proper bonding or insurance or liability. So, that's probably why they're not, accepting any notices. They're not sending return receipts. Stuff's just going in the trash or they're just rejecting it. So this is a form of plausible deniability, and it's a crime because they do have an obligation. But the fact that they don't have the proper paperwork justifying them being in that position to begin with is probably why they get away with it. And we know this. So what are the people going to do to step up and course correct any of these things? Because I'm of the mind that, if I send you something and, good faith and clean hands and you reject that, that's like a slap in the face. That's like a challenge at that point. But how do you default them in dishonor then for what they're doing? Because they do have a ministerial duty, whether they're a court clerk or whoever, they do have some type of clerical capacity where they're supposed to accept notices, right?
Yeah, well,
So,
we just got to hold them to it.
right. So, basically, it sends letters, threats, and sometimes, agents come because of these types of notices or because you're trying to file something. We talked about them, hitting the big panic button because they don't recognize the paperwork that you're trying to file. Or, so we go from that into, um, basically there's just a whole bunch of resistance, and that's a sign to me that you're on the right path because the system's control doesn't resist what's irrelevant. They resist what's powerful. So if you're coming with something lawfully correct and historically backed, they're going to resist against it because they know that their hands are dirty every time.
Yeah.
So, we get from that into restoration, and rebuilding. This is where the real magic's going to happen. As assemblies are growing, they're not just resisting, they're rebuilding, they're restoring the original American system, one county at a time. So imagine a future where, land is held, in patent, not in deed, where disputes are resolved by peace officers, not armed enforcers. When I say peace officers, I mean peacekeepers, not peace officers. Um, Communities that govern themselves through consensus, not corporate policy. Where children learn about natural law, not just statutory codes. When I say children, I mean progeny. So this isn't a utopia I'm talking about. It's an original design and it's being restored. As we speak, it's being restored in one way or the other by assembly members across the country. So, this isn't being controlled by politicians, but, by our people, our American people who have come home to help restore and take back what was once ours. And, let's keep citing how the Reconstruction Act was never fulfilled. In fact,
Yeah.
it was commercialized and it was rewritten numerous times so that way they can make sure that we didn't reconstruct.
Yeah. Well, the shift from citizenship to stewardship is perhaps the biggest shift is internal. Being a free American isn't just about paperwork. It's about a mindset. It's about stewardship of your land, of your rights, your community, and your future. It's about moving from passive consumer to active creator, from subject to sovereign, from managed to self-governed. And that shift is already underway. We try to bring it out here every week as much as we can. It is underway. It's happening in every state of the union. It's happening in a lot of counties in the states. And you guys are just starting to see it. I know a lot of you that are watching our American State Nationals, and you go to the assembly meetings and you see what's going on. It's getting bigger and bigger. Like I said early on in this episode, people are starting to wake up. I'm noticing it big time.
Right. And, it's kind of hard to help these, corporate agencies or administrative agencies kind of comprehend where we're coming from, that they're sitting in vacated positions. It's just difficult. There's a lot of, a lot of them choose to just be that way, because of paycheck and stability and those types of things. But there's a lot of plausible deniability and there's a lot of cognitive dissonance. Things that just, I'm not going along with that because, it's coming from the top down and from other agencies that are more powerful than theirs. And, a lot of them are just, they're doing what they're told. But
Yeah.
look at what happened with COVID. You're doing what you're told to kill people in the hospitals because they're profiting from it. And
Yeah,
that's just disgusting.
I sure hope these guys don't expect, mercy when we tell you and tell you and tell you, and you just keep, you're doing it for some reason. You know right from wrong. The law.
Right.
Better prepare to reap the whirlwind,
Yeah. So, what comes next? More awakening, more resilience, it's going to look like resistance, but it's resilience,
Yeah.
more restoration, more freedom. The corporate empire may be ending. We've talked about how they've been dissolved numerous times, but yet they're still running as if nothing ever happened. The people aren't even aware that, they've been completely changed and switched under different LLCs or different registration right under their nose, but kept the same names and same seals up until just recently. I've been noticing across the country, not just Summit County. Summit County Municipal is now Akron Municipal. That's fraudulent as hell. But anyway,
I wouldn't expect anything less. It's probably due to some kind of bankruptcy or money shifting around. Where
it's funny because back in January, I think even going into last November, we were talking about this. We were talking about how they've been dissolved and why are they still running, and why is there no accountability? I guess we're supposed to be cracking the whip on them, but they're changing names and seals and jurisdictions, and when they change the name, there's not going to be a smooth transition keeping the same cases that were under the previous name. Those cases they're voided now. They don't get to come over to the new name. This is not how corporations work. This is not a a loan of sorts where you take those things and now they come over here and they get put into a new docket system.
It's fraud, Like I said, I think last week, and when I was mentioning about everything's just a lie. Everything is a fucking fraud. Everything. Stock market's the same way. All these corporations, all these companies, they go bankrupt, change their name, be bought out. It's just all shit. And it's destroying the country. It's ruining people's retirements. It's nuts.
Yeah, there's no such thing as pensions anymore. I mean, they're just not very many places offer them legitimately. They're trying to get away from that by outsourcing or cutting hours to cut benefits. A lot of them don't do matching anymore with 401k. So, basically what we're talking about is the American spirit. It's just beginning. It's coming back. It's really thriving. And, regardless of what anybody says or what anybody thinks without doing their research, there's plenty of contingencies. I'm not worried about what I say because I know where to look and how to back it. And it takes a lot of true grit, to be able to go out there and speak about this type of stuff unapologetically, just altruistically, genuinely, because these people, they're being lied to. They're just, the way their training is set up, the way the Libra Code training is set up, it's all based off of fraud and deception and bullying, and just, we could call things all kinds of domestic terrorist organizations. We can do that. But before I do that, I would like to talk with these people and offer amnesty. But I'm not going to do it because they're harassing me or pulling intimidation tactics. It's going to be done peacefully. If it can't be peacefully, hey, the joke's on you because we tried. And at the end of the day, I'm going to sleep like a baby because I'm going to have a good conscience that I tried my best. And if they're not willing to come to the table,
Yeah, that's just the way it's going to go. Well, let's wrap it. I think we did pretty good, giving it out there today. Let's wrap this up.
Yeah.
I just want everybody to remember, this isn't about you. It's about your children. It's about your community. It's about your country. Their system only works if you stay asleep. It's wake up, stand up, and speak up. That's what we need. So wanted to thank you, Adam, for stopping by again. I think we did a good job.
No problem.
Remind everybody, check out the screen there. Check into pktfnews.org, claimyourinheritance.info, and standup.land, where you can get your papers, your political status papers changed over there. They'll help you out. It's a real easy process. But other than that, Adam, you got some social medias you want to give a shout out to?
You know what? Normally I would. I'm kind of occupied with other things going on. Just, the Reef Shop Talk 44 on Rumble. I'll be adding to it here shortly, and possibly over on YouTube, but, I'm not going to give it a name. It'll probably be changing.
Yeah, that's a good one. Well, anyways, I just wanted to let everybody know we do have a Cash App for if you want to donate. It's $APC 140. We'd appreciate it. It always helps out, but if not, no big deal. And that's it. Thanks everybody for stopping by. Thanks for the comments. We'll keep it up every week.
Have a good weekend.
Yeah, we'll keep it up. You guys start getting your stuff done. Start changing your statuses. Bring back our country. Bring back our government the right way.
Right.
Thanks a lot, Adam.
America great again.
All right, we'll see you all later. Thanks for stopping by.